Okay, we can change it. Okay, we can. Yeah, we'll change the agenda. Yeah, we'll just okay. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the agenda and change the agenda. The applicant is tied up at the bridge, so we're gonna move 002 to 001. Now, with that, do we have a motion to approve the agenda as presented with the change?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We have it's hard to believe, we have the minutes of November 28th to approve. So that's the last time we met, folks. So, yeah. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, so with the change in the agenda, we'll go to 002. Now, could we have the applicant for 002 come up to the podium here and then give us your name and address?
Yeah, Robert Summers, address is 8170 South Roseville, and the architect of project representatives.
Okay. What we're going to do here is we normally have Brian do an overview of the applicant, the zoning application, so that we can all get on an even keel.
Huh, that works fine. Yeah, the mic wasn't on.
Oh, okay. So Brian's going to come up and give us an overview, and then after he gives us the overview, then you can come, and then we're going to be questioning you.
Yeah, I'm basically here to answer your questions anyways.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Give me 2 seconds to get the technology up to date here, and away we go. Okay, first case this evening, property at 18603 Park Lane. This is our subject site on the screen, if you can see my cursor right here. This is a waterfront lot, a very large waterfront lot on the east side of Park Lane. Site and surrounding on the east side are zoned R1A. Petitioner seeks tonight some variances related to a detached accessory building in general, more specifically that being a pool house associated with this pool right here, if you can see my cursor again. Pertinent ordinance section in this case is 1911, which regulates detached accessory buildings. So here's a look at the overall site plan. This is the main residence, and as you probably noted in my letter, if any of you have been out to the site or had a chance to get out there, there are currently existing, there are several detached accessory buildings. By my count, I had them at 4 existing in total, plus 5 being the new proposed pool house, which is this guy in pink right here. Again, existing residents here. One of the points of interest is that this property, where the pool house is going, there's currently a residence that sits there, and the parcels right now are separate. So if this is ultimately approved, that residence would be demolished, the pool house would be built in its place, and these 2 properties would be combined into a single parcel. So it would be one even large parcel, if you will. So in total, about 5.5 acres with the combination. Here's the first view of the building renderings that were provided. You can see it's a pitched roof, masonry exterior. There's a a covered area. There's actually two covered areas. There's a pergola and there's a more formal covered area, as well as an enclosed space that would house a small kitchen area, a bath area, and a small entertaining space, as well as what accounts to approximately like a one-car garage on the street front side. So that's this piece right here. And then the larger chunk of enclosed space is towards the waterfront side. So in terms of our ordinance provisions, as I mentioned, 1911 regulates detached accessory buildings. 4 of the key points contained therein include that only one detached accessory building is allowed. On waterfront lots, they must either be in a side yard or a waterfront yard, so long as they comply with the average shoreline setback. They have a maximum area that's pretty restrictive of 120 square feet. And there's also a prohibition on residential plumbing within detached accessory buildings. So those 4 regulations, based on this proposal, equate to the 4 variances that are necessary. So for starters, as I showed you on the site plan, with the demolition of the residence and future combination of the property, this would be the 5th detached accessory building on a single parcel. The building itself is located in what would equate to the street front yard, because that's now based on the principal residence, which is here. So all of this area, basically from Park Lane front lot line to the residence, equates to the street front yard. The building itself is, I calculated the enclosed space at about 1,300 square feet off of the floor plan. Again, on waterfront lots, you're limited to only 120 square feet. So really, the allowance is just for a very small shed, if you will. In that case, it's not even sizable for a garage space. And then lastly, the one that I want to make sure we talk about this evening is the pool house does include residential plumbing. I mentioned there's a small kitchen area. There's also a bath with a shower. So that is not something that we typically see in the township, and by ordinance, it is prohibited. They are seeking, that's in essence the 4th variance that they are seeking for this particular building. So you all have my review letter in hand. A quick overview of the letter. I did note a few things. So, given the nature and the size of the site, I've equated this property to what I refer to as kind of an estate type property. Again, it's 5.5 acres. There are multiple buildings, very large residence. There's a lot going on here, but the property certainly is sizable to accommodate all of those items, in my opinion. To put the restrictions on this property that we would apply to a conventional lot, in my opinion, you could find that to be a bit burdensome. We're talking about 120 square feet. We're talking about a limited number. In instances where you don't have 5.5 acres of land to accommodate these structures, some of those limitations are warranted. I'm not sure in this case that it needs to be that way. I also noted there are a couple of things. So as far as anytime we're dealing with variances, I always look for alternatives. What are our options to granting these variances? Could we eliminate a variance? Can we find a way to even avoid ZBA altogether, which is obviously everyone's first choice, but it doesn't always work out that way. But that's a reason we haven't had a meeting for several months too, because people have been working things out. So the compliant options in this case, because we're dealing with essentially 2 residential properties fully developed, the applicant really they could sell or they could rent out the house to the north. That would be a compliant option. Doesn't grant a pool house, doesn't allow for combination of the properties. Or they could demolish the structures that are on the northerly parcel. Those, in that case, then the properties could be combined. They would have their one large 5.5-acre estate. However, in order to do so and keep the accessory buildings in line and to not have two principal dwellings on a single parcel, they would have to demolish both of those buildings. So again, my opinion, it's up to you all, but I think you could find that to be a somewhat unreasonable situation to be placed in. There are some other quite large, again, I use my phrase, estate-sized, just to kind of give a good description to how I feel this property should be viewed. There are a few others in this area of the township along Park Lane. Those properties also have multiple accessory buildings. They have multiple uses going on, extremely large residences, and they have the property area to accommodate all of those types of uses and buildings. So I think you could make a finding that it's generally in keeping with those other similar properties. So when I was going through 1911, I mentioned kind of what I think is my primary concern with the proposal that's before you. And that's the inclusion of the residential plumbing. In my experience, not necessarily my Groseal experience, but my experience outside of the township with other communities, pool houses oftentimes have small kitchens, and they almost always have some type of bathroom facility. Quite frankly, that's probably the driving purpose, and I can't speak for the applicant, but that's probably one of the driving points of wanting to have the pool house in the first place, such that anybody you're entertaining at the pool doesn't have to walk all the way to the house, and then who knows what they trudge up. They're wet, and now they've got to come into what's a very nice, quite elegant house, sopping wet to use the bathroom. It definitely is a convenience factor. Again, properties like this, it's not uncommon, but my concern is tied to the fact that once you include that small kitchen area, once you include that bathroom, it could always be used for residential purposes. I want to make sure that if you were going to consider favorable action here tonight, I want to make sure that we attach a condition that this pool house can only be used as ancillary to the pool and cannot be used for overnight stay so as to result in a secondary dwelling or residence, which would be a violation of your ordinance anyway. But I think it's best if we put that on the record, so long as the petitioner is agreeable to that and doesn't have any strong objections. I think that I would feel more comfortable if we had something strong on the record to make sure we don't end up in an unfortunate situation with the property. I've also recommended a second condition. That one has already been offered as part of the submittal, but I think it's best to kind of loop everything together, connect the dots, if you will, and that is that if you're going to grant the variances, then the applicant must combine the two parcels. If they did not, then we would find ourselves in a situation where we would have two detached accessory buildings, in essence, on a parcel. You can't have accessory without principal. So combining, it can't be done right now because it creates nonconformity. It has to be done if the variances are granted. It's kind of an interesting situation we find ourselves in here. My closing point really just hits to all the rest of your 14 standards, and that is, based on my review, I don't believe there will be an impact on things like public safety, land values, supply of light and air, traffic flow, development of surrounding properties. I did put a caveat on the neighborhood character finding, and that is tied specifically back to the first condition that I've suggested. I do think that in order to make a clean finding on neighborhood character, we need a strong prohibition on this pool house being used as a secondary dwelling. I think allowing use as a secondary dwelling, to me, then we've kind of crossed the line, and I'm not sure that having two residences would be in keeping with neighborhood character as a single-family district. So that's my closing point, Mr. Chair. Happy to take any questions you may have, or I can turn it over to the applicant if you have questions of them.
Any questions?
When this property came before us, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years, I think part of the reason for it was it was a combined property and we separated it.
So a couple things of that. It was in 2013, and it was actually for property to the south. It was not for this northerly parcel. And ultimately, that request was withdrawn by the applicant. Yep. So there was a case, though. There are actually a couple people that remembered that. How you guys remembered 5-year-old cases was...
In the roadway. I remember the roadway.
Yes.
I do remember that.
Yep. So ultimately, there was a case. It was not anything that was pertinent to this request, and it was ultimately the final action was withdrawal by the petitioner at that time. So there was never action on it that would have affected anything to this parcel.
Any other questions? Gary?
Yeah, just, it's a little confusing. I know what's going on. The applicant refers to a 900 square foot building. You talk about 1,300, and I think that, and then on the plans, he talks about 1,600 under the roof and 964 living space. So I think I know what's going on, but we're...
I'll ask the project architect to confirm. My suspicion is probably as yours is that 964 is probably exclusive of the garage space.
We've got a pergola.
Right. And then there's a pergola and there's the covered area.
Got the carriage house, which has plumbing in it too.
Yeah, my 1,300's calculation was, again, just based off the floor plan. That was only the enclosed space.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter because it's still over 120.
Yeah, correct. just by a little bit.
Still a variance.
Correct.
The other question I have is if it's in the side yard, does that change our perspective?
If it were in the side yard, then the yard placement would be allowable, but it's not in the side yard.
But it could be.
Oh, you could move it back.
Yes, if you moved it east, if you draw a line from the front corner of the building to the pool, the building would still be in the immediate vicinity of the pool.
So my only, I appreciate what you're trying to do to get rid of a variance. My concern with that would be, in order to fit this in the side yard and eliminate a variance, we're putting it square into the average shoreline setback, and it's the residence to the north, this thing would be closer to the water than is the residence to the north. And I think that would probably be more problematic than granting a yard location variance. Just my opinion. I'm always looking, believe me, anything we can do to get rid of variance is a good thing, but I do think it would have to go to the east enough to qualify as the defined side yard, that it would be right in the sight lines for that property to the north, and probably even encroaching into the average shoreline setback, which would then be its own variance.
Depends on the size of the
as
building.
a trade-off. Sure. The building could be smaller, it could be relocated there.
Move closer to the house as well as east.
Those are all options. But yeah, no, you have a good point. To me, I think there's less impact if it were to stay where it is than to push it to the east, just as a quick response.
Any other questions? We have any questions from the audience? Can we, Kurt, I know you had a question about a confirmation.
Thank you. Kurt Koblak, 18373 Park Lane, and I'm helping the architect as well as the applicant. Had the opportunity, I actually live to the north of this property and had the opportunity of talking to the most adjacent northern neighbor to the applicant. I do have a letter just to place on file showing that they support this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you'd give the letter to Lori, then Okay, with that, then I'm going to call the applicant up. Thanks, Kurt.
I think Brian has answered just about everything I was going to present. He even showed you the pretty pictures, so we're probably good with that. With regard to the square footage, I updated the square footage on the plan, but it's just a confirmation. And actually, because I do square footage calculations with the computer, so they're accurate, what I've got on this is the living area is actually 964 square feet. He was correct in that it did not include the garage area. The garage area is another 320, and then the area under the portico area, which is not the pergola, but the more formal roofed area, that is another 340. So the actual living area is 964. But the area under the roof comes closer to what Brian was indicating, even though a lot of it is open. With regard to two of the other points, the caveats that he had in there, we have absolutely no problem with complying with the request to do that. With regard to the plumbing situation, there is absolutely no intent to use this as any kind of residential facility. You will note that there is no bedroom within it. It is exactly as Brian had indicated, that it's for a cabana and for bathroom facilities close to the pool area. I'm not sure the owner would really want people staying overnight anyway, but we have absolutely no problem with having something to designate that. What was the other one that, Brian, I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, that's a given. This is contingent upon combining that anyway. That's the full intent of what we want to do.
So the intent is to combine?
Yes, absolutely.
Any other questions of the applicant? Okay.
I would only add on, and I don't know if all the members of the board got a chance to go out and look at this, but certainly there's more than enough room, as Brian has stated. The variances, the restrictions that you were looking at, 120 square foot a building, you'd look at that and you look at this property and you would not, you go, that doesn't really apply here. The fact that what they're asking for is actually on a separate lot right now and a side. I mean, it's far away from the home and plenty of room certainly for it. It's replacing, I think, a 2,800 square foot home. So you're going down to 13 or 9 or whatever the amount you want to look at it is. It'll fit nice. The pool is there, and that's, of course, what requires that building to be really where it is. I think looking at moving it forward, backside, that is where you have it is probably the best place for it, for the aesthetics of the neighborhood as well as for the estate itself.
Thank you.
So it is. I would say, Mr. Stevenson, you have one of the nicest properties on the island, and what you've done with it, very nice. So. This would be a nice addition if we approve it.
2 points I would just like to bring up to give you a little frame of reference. When I first was engaged to do this project, the thing that it most closely reminded me of was the Etzel Ford Estate in St. Clair Shores, a much smaller version of it, but very, very similar in nature and feel to that, and that's kind of what we're trying to achieve. One of the main interests in the owners, too, is gardening and landscaping. The architecture was designed to allow for quite a bit of landscaping to be brought in and enhanced and things like that. So that's another central focus of the owner.
So now that you brought up the DSO and the Etzel Ford Estate, they do have a DSO night, which I go to every year.
We're frequently there.
You too?
Yeah.
I think Leo would do the same thing.
You'd have to speak directly to him. I can't speak to that.
And John, with our bridge situation, make it a lot easier for you.
We go by boat?
What kind of timetable are we looking at here?
I believe we would like to begin construction late summer, early fall, if that's possible. It's nothing that's the time frame we're aiming at. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, but that's what we're aiming at.
So you figure this will be done by the end of the year?
Probably not till the pool season opens in 2019.
About a year.
Yeah.
I have just two quick questions. As far as the 900 square foot living space, does it have heating for human space, not for the pool, and air?
Right.
Or air conditioning?
Yes, it will be heated so that they can use it in late fall, early spring. Yeah.
Okay. And it has air conditioning as well?
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions of the applicant? Hearing none, can we have a motion on this application?
Well, I would move that we would bring case number 18002 to a vote for approval, and with the stipulation that the property be combined, as we talked about, and there is absolutely no overnight residential accommodations for the property.
I would support that motion.
Support, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hearing all ayes, motion carries, so the application is approved. Thank you. You know, I look at the Planning Commission and look at what we have in regards to estate planning. Probably there's nothing in it that really addresses itself to an estate this large. So it might be something to have somebody say, well, let's look at it from the standpoint of a larger land area.
Well, and there are several in that mile, if you will, on Park Lane going south. I mean, you know.
Yes. And when you drive,
And they're all
And they all
similar,
have
yeah.
multiple
Yeah.
accessory buildings.
Right.
Front, back, side.
Too big, too many.
Yes.
Based on our ordinances, yeah. So you, Brian, I'd ask you, do you think it'd be worth?
I think it's possible. I don't know that I would push it up to the top of the list right now, only because the truth of the matter is it would apply to a half dozen
Yeah, how many
homes.
properties do we have like that?
We'd really have to do the research to see. I mean, if we're talking about 20 plus properties, there might be a reason to put an exception in for exceptionally large estate type situations. Given that to my knowledge, there's obviously I won't name names. There's a few that come to mind. I can come up with about 4 or 5 just thinking about it. If there's only a few, it might be better off just to treat it as a case where
We may have to meet.
they have
twice
to
a
come
year.
back to ZBA. Yeah, it's entirely possible.
it just seems that the 120 square feet kind of is.
I mean, yeah, it automatically, it means you're going to come to ZBA, but on the other hand, there's not that many, and we.
That's the fine line. I don't want to write an ordinance for 5 homes, but I think it's worth keeping an eye on.
Thanks.
Okay. Do we have all the participants for 001?
Architect is not here, he's still stuck at the bridge, but we can proceed. So.
He still stopped at the bridge?
It took Chuck 45 minutes, he said.
Do you want to proceed?
Yeah, I think we can, yeah.
Why don't you come up and
Mr. Chair, before we start, in the interest of transparency, Mr. Boardman and I are acquaintances. He, in fact, remodeled my house, still does occasional work projects. He was there last month. And I throw that out to the board. If that's a problem, I will recuse myself. Or if the applicant prefers, I will.
How does the applicant feel? How does the board feel?
I personally don't see any.
I don't have any problem. No.
I would just sit in the.
Okay, fine, thank you. I just want to be open and upfront.
Okay, with that, we'll have the applicant come up and address, name and address.
Lee Boardman with Boardman Construction. I'm going to be the contractor for this project. Tom Roberts, Architects out of Wyandotte. He's stuck at the bridge, so I should hopefully be able to field any questions you guys got at this point moving forward. So, okay.
Okay, with the same procedure, we're going to have Brian come up and give us an overview of the application, and then you can come up and give us your
Thank you.
answer questions.
Thanks again, Mr. Chair. Let me get the presentation back in order here. You move the agenda around on me, and my presentation gets all out of whack. So, all right, second case tonight, property 29761 East River Road. This is our guy right here. East side of East River. I think we're all pretty familiar with Hickory Island. This is the portion of Hickory Island that is within the R1F single-family district, which is a zoning district that was created a few years ago to reflect the unique development pattern that this area of the township had. There were, as you may recall, this used to be a real issue in terms of nonconformity. The ordinance amendment did vastly improve that situation, but it did not correct 100% of those situations, hence our presence here this evening. So the request tonight is to expand the existing residence. There is approximately, my number had 390 square foot addition on the street front side and a 53 square foot addition on the waterfront side. We'll be looking at sections 3.5 and 18.6 of the zoning ordinance for consideration this evening. This is a look at the site plan. So if you can see my cursor, left side of the screen is East River Road, existing detached garage in the street front yard, as is pretty much every property in this area. Here's the existing residence highlighted in blue. And then here are the two proposed additions that I mentioned. So here's the street front addition, and then here's a smaller waterfront side addition. So two things I want to bring to your attention that I will reiterate in my wrap-up. One, if you can follow this dashed line here, you'll note that there's a slight jog in the property. So as you go from street towards water, the width of the property actually reduces by about 3 or 4 feet. And of course, this is the proximity of where the residence is. So that's one thing I wanted to bring to your attention. A couple of others, you can see that same dashed line depicting the property line on the south side. You can see that there's very little space in between the building and the south side property line. That is depicted as a 1.3 foot setback. That is the existing condition of the residence, and that is the proposed setback for our two additions. So in essence, they are proposing to match the established side yard. Two other points off-site that I think do have some impact in this request. One, if you look at the home to the north, that residence is actually pretty much at a 0 lot line side setback. And if you look at the residence to the south, it is compliant for setback purposes, but as I note in my review letter, one of the affecting conditions here for the proposed addition off to the waterfront side is the slight angle that the north face of that residence has. So you can see that it's much closer as we go towards the waterfront. So moving from street to water, there's actually a compliant spacing for the street front addition, but then we have a narrowing of that spacing, if you will, to 8.2 feet as proposed on the waterfront side addition. Here's a look at the elevation drawings. So you can see this is the street front view. So this is the larger addition that you would see from the street, albeit you probably won't see it from the street because it's set back so far and there's vegetation. Nonetheless, that's the view. Here's the side elevation. Again, here's the larger street front side addition. Here's the smaller waterfront side. Opposite view, bottom of screen from the side, and then waterfront side, this being the smaller addition. You can see it's smaller both in square footage as well as height. So on the waterfront side, I think they were cognizant, I don't want to speak for the team or the architect, I think they were somewhat cognizant of not building up too high, out too far on the waterfront side. Obviously on Hickory Island, people are very respectful of the shoreline setback in this area and the views that are provided. So I mentioned 2 ordinance sections in particular. Because of that 1.3 foot existing side yard setback, this is considered a non-conforming building. Anytime there's a request to expand a non-conforming building, we have a 3-pronged test to determine if that is allowable or not. The first part of that test is that only one setback is non-conforming. The second part of the test is that the non-conforming side provides at least 90% of what's required in the district. And then the third point is that anything newly proposed has to meet current ordinance standards. So we are strike 1, strike 2, strike 3. So none of those conditions applies in this particular instance. So that's the first variance that we're here for tonight. I also mentioned 3.5, which are the dimensional requirements, the schedule of regulations for the single family district. R1F has a minimum side yard of 5 feet and has a minimum building spacing for new construction of 12 feet. So in short, variance 1, to expand a non-conforming residence where the standards of 18.6A are not met. Number 2 is proposed additions with a side yard setback of 1.3 feet, where a minimum of 5 feet would be required. And number 3, a spacing as a result that is basically as small as 8.2 feet, where a minimum of 12 feet is required. Overview of my letter. So I did note a few things here I think that are important for your consideration. 1, because of the existing conditions of this property and the residence, it cannot be expanded without variances. So this is a case where alternatives are somewhat limited. Anything they wanted to do to this residence in terms of keeping it and expanding it, they would be here before you no matter what. So that's the first point. I've already mentioned the 2 additions do match the existing 1.3 foot setback, so while it is relatively narrow, they are matching that condition. They are not making it any worse. They're not trying to encroach further. I also mentioned the reduced spacing. It's not entirely due to the angle of the residence to the south, but I do think that plays a factor. Again, the street front side addition is actually compliant on its spacing, and you can see it angles towards the waterfront side of the subject site, and that does have some impact. That in combination with the fact that it's a 1.3 foot side yard setback, I think are really the conditions that are present with respect to that individual variance. I did try to look at alternatives again, as I mentioned with our first case, and I did want to pose a question to the project team on this, be it the builder, the designer, whomever, and that is, to me, the primary alternative to what's proposed would be to sort of mirror these additions, except do them off of the north side of the residence. Were they to do that, we would be looking at a situation where they would eliminate one of the 3 variances that they're currently requesting. So we cannot get to a point where we ever eliminate all of the variances being requested. If they were to be able to do that, that would be a situation where, again, they would need 2 variances still. So we can never get all the way there, but I did ask that they at least speak to that tonight, and I would just like something on the record indicating why that's not reasonable, why it's not feasible, maybe the design of the house, maybe the construction of the roof. It could be all sorts of things, but I do think it's important to get that on the record. Next point, I mentioned at the outset as well, there is this somewhat, I won't call it odd, because there's stranger things in this township for certain, but the slight jog in the north side property line, which narrows the property even further. It actually takes it below conventional R1F standards at that point. So certainly I see there being a pretty significant impact of a narrow lot, and certainly the effect it has on your ability to comply with side yard setbacks. These conditions that I've mentioned, being the established conditions as well as the narrow lot width, established building conditions as well as the narrow lot width, were not under the control of the property owner. We do have that self-created standard, so clearly not a case where that is something that's viable. And then closing point is just tied to, again, all of the remainder, the plethora of conditions that the ordinance contains. I don't see an impact on public safety, land values, neighborhood character. There are a number of homes in very similar situations in this part of the township. Of note, I mentioned the home adjacent to the north of our subject site, which has a 0 lot line side yard setback. So 1 foot setbacks are not altogether uncommon here. It is something I don't believe affects the character. Though it is something that, we did try to correct, and I think for the most part we improved the situation. And again, I don't see really the potential impacts to traffic nor the adjacent properties at this point. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Let me go back to the site.
Thanks, Brian. Any questions for Brian from the board? Hearing none, can we now have the applicant come up and now, can you give us, so you're the owners,
These are the owners, yep.
So could you give us your names?
We're here for support. We're here for support.
Right.
You're a supporter, but you have to give us your name and your address.
Alana Koroski, 29761 East River Road.
And Steve Zeckley, 29761 East River Road.
Thank you. Okay, questions for Mr. Boardman? The question that Brian...
Go ahead. That's what I was going to...
Yeah, the question that Brian raised as to the placement of the structure on the south side, can you move it to the north side?
So to achieve what we're trying to do on the inside, by keeping a lot of it in place, there's actually 2 components in the house, which I'll show you kind of where they're at. You've got a staircase in this area here that is in that square footage and footprint. It's hard to relocate. Then you also have a chimney in this portion here, which we are trying not to relocate, keeping it so it's as less of a cost burden, with the project. So if by moving this to the other side, it really creates a lot of not structural, but architecturally difficult to achieve what we're trying to do for them to open up to, increase the usable square footage kind of in a more efficient way. It would require us to kind of remove that chimney and relocate that staircase, which would be a significant cost for them. So that's why we're trying to keep everything to the south side. Yeah.
What about the other addition?
This addition here on the front, this is going to be for a dining room space here. Now it's the way the house is set up. By switching to the other side, it would not necessarily be the same function that is being used. We're trying to increase the spot for a dining. I'm sorry?
With 3 feet 10 inches, you're in compliance, if I'm correct, Brian? 12 feet?
12-foot spacing, 5-foot side yard setback.
Are you talking about sliding it north 3 foot 10 inches?
Yeah. That does a couple things. First of all, the homeowner to the south has a window right in that corner that your 13-foot high addition will block.
Okay.
And by moving it, you allow more light in there for her. The other part of that is you're still showing the air conditioner on the same, 1.3 setback. Can't that be moved?
Yeah, we can relocate the air conditioning unit. That wouldn't be a problem. Yeah. By sliding, so now if we're sliding 3 feet to the north, this whole addition.
3'10".
I'm sorry, 3'10" to the north, it does create an issue with this entryway. Now this is the main entryway into the house here, so we're actually squeezing that whole front entryway in. And then reducing 3'10", almost 4 feet out of the addition again creates, it's not a very big addition that's going on there. It's only, I believe, 300 and
4 by 14.
Yeah, so it's not that large trying to get a bedroom, a bathroom, and a laundry room in there. By reducing 4 feet, you're taking, what, 20% possibly out of the actual addition.
Or sliding it.
Right, then it becomes an issue.
What about the height?
The height is to match the existing roof lines that are there. I mean, we could, but it would be something that would take the proportion from what's there currently. So you're going from a 612 roof down to a 412. It's not necessarily aesthetically pleasing when you're looking at it from the west.
Aesthetics aren't an issue for this.
Right, I got you. Yeah. So.
Those are my basic questions.
So that addition actually is to increase the dining area?
Off the front, we're increasing the dining room, yes.
The dining room?
Dining room space, yeah, yep.
So why do you need to increase the dining room?
Well, it's really not a dining room space as it is now. It's small. It doesn't even fit a 6x6 table, so we're just trying to get a very modest size space to dine.
Not a dining room.
Yeah, what would the space be with the addition?
With the
size?
It would be part of the dining room space now. So the dining room space, would you say, is 8 by 10 maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not very large. So all we're doing is extending it just to get a modest size table in there. Is what we're doing, and it also gives, again, it's an architectural detail from the front. Helps, break up some of the planes on the front of the house. But it's a tight house, a tight floor plan. It really is. It's little. Yeah.
Do you see any way, Gary was talking about mitigating that 8 foot, what was it, 8'6" or?
It's 8'2", the ordinance is 12.
12 foot, right. Do you see any way of mitigating that?
And then you're blocking the living sides.
I mean, getting it to to match the back portion at 13.8, I believe is what we're at?
13.5.
13.5. I don't see it necessarily being feasible, keeping with the design and keeping with the house there. It would be something that would be tough. It would be tough to do just because, again, we're not dealing with a lot of square footage. So by moving just a foot or two is a big impact when we're only talking, 35 feet across. So it's.
Do we have anything from the homeowner to the south as to whether they're okay with your?
I believe we have letters. Yeah.
We also have a member of the Hickory Island Board with us.
Yes, the Hickory Island Board.
Right.
Approving.
And we also sent a letter to Lori and Patty from the south. She would have came. I didn't. But
Do you have that? Do you have the letter?
Documentation?
He signed off on a plan.
Oh, okay.
With the
Okay.
board, the board makes sure that the north and
Okay.
south neighbors are
Who signed off on the plan?
The person to the south.
to the south.
Yep.
Neighbor to the south, she signed off. Where is that at? Where's the sign off?
It's on a plan at Holmes, but that was confirmed with the board.
Mr. Chair, that's part of the association. That's how their association grants the approval. So the letter that was included in your packet was from the association, noting the association signed off on the plans. Their due diligence in signing off on plans is to contact adjacent neighbors. So we don't have their record of the neighbors signing off, but in essence, it's inherent within the board's approval.
Okay.
And if I may, that window of concern, very good point, but she doesn't use that window. She has stained glass in all their windows. They're on that side. So she's not really concerned about that issue, but I know that doesn't, there's protocol followed there.
So she's not concerned about that? How do you feel about moving the structure to the north?
Well,
We're trying to work within existing walls to, quite frankly, maintain the structure. We're central to the home. It is a great room area that we are trying to preserve as much as we can for historical purposes and aesthetic purposes. We're relocating the kitchen to the front of the house on the water side there, on the north side, and we would flip it the other way so that it would be on the south side of the home, but it doesn't give sufficient square footage because of that existing central room to the house. It gives enough room for a small dining room on that south side with that little bit of addition. So to move that addition to the north of the home really doesn't give us any more functional space that we need. We don't really need it at that place. So we would have to look at reconfiguring the entire layout at that point.
You know, one of the things that I would always like to see is a floor plan layout, but with your presentation, we didn't have a floor plan layout. Is this going to have a second? Is this going to have a second floor?
Addition, no. The existing house does have a second floor that we're not changing. We're just
putting the roof going into it and
we're
everything.
going to address a bathroom, and that's pretty much it. So, yeah, but no, the second floor is all staying. I'm sorry, the addition is all staying on first floor.
Yeah, well, like I said, I normally like to see a layout.
Yeah,
of the floor.
I can't speak to the architect on that. I'm surprised it's not really in there, but yeah.
So the roof's that high just to match?
It's matching existing pitches. Yep.
Our objective really is to make people conform to the ordinances or to try to minimize the ordinances, the ones that don't conform. So that's what we try to do, and that's why we go through these questions and try to get you to minimize as much as possible, if possible. And that's why, and one of the things that we look at, we don't necessarily look at the cost in itself. You say that it's going to cost a lot maybe to move the structure to the north, but we look at that, but that's not a determinant factor. Are there any other questions? Okay, do we have a motion on this appeal 001?
I'll make a motion that appeals 18001 be approved.
Second.
Do you have any comments on that? Hearing no comments, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Hearing all ayes, the permit is approved. The appeal is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, Lori?
Call your architect. Tell him don't come over the bridge. Save it.
Let him come over.
Yeah.
Go back.
Yeah, Lori, what do we got coming up? Anything?
1.5.
1.5. Okay. So
for next month?
So you're trying to talk somebody out of it? No.
John, I'm going to have to work over something. Yeah. always has that problem. I think it's more his.
Talk about this off-air?
No, I mean he has it. I mean just because of his job. But I just throw it out.
What's the purpose then?
Just to move it up so everybody can get done earlier.
Oh.
That's all.
It used to be 7:30.
I know, yeah, and I got you to 7. Chuck, Chuck, how would that affect you?
Unfortunately, I could not make it earlier. My office.
This is as good as you can do.
Northwestern is 12 miles.
Oh.
It's a 45-minute drive without a bridge.
Right. Okay.
If I leave at 5 o'clock, I'm cutting it close to getting here
Yeah.
at 6. So
Okay.
It wouldn't work for me, but I could move things around and try to accommodate it if the rest of the board would.
I was just thinking with the fact that we, number one, don't have that many, and just for Brian, for Lori, and for the
We're working
rest
on getting
of us.
us more, Jim.
Yeah, I know. I see. It's. But okay, no.
Can we put this to rest then? I think that
sure.
There's a reason why.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, and that's fine. If
All right.
we can't do it, we can't do it.
Okay. I was going through the planning news that I get monthly, and one of the things that I noticed is that we got mentioned in the Supreme Court of our taking ordinance for the Grosse Ile Township. It was mentioned, Grosse Ile's taking ordinance was mentioned in the Supreme Court presentation. That was I was going to bring it, but I forgot to bring it, but it was kind of interesting. At any rate, do we have any other questions? Anything?
We all stick around afterwards.
No, we want to stick around.
Party.
Yeah. Well, okay. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
The zoning board meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Wait, something.
Oh, let's see.